right, welcome back everyone to SuiteScript Stories. My name is Eric Grubaugh. I am a SuiteScript coach, and I am joined by my exalted co-host, Tim Dietrich.
Didn't let
And
me down.
today we are here to talk about why we both love and hate NetSuite customization. And this episode is graciously hosted and sponsored by Salto. And Salto is not a consulting company looking to sell you services. Instead, they have built a powerful software platform to help you deploy, track, manage, plan your NetSuite development changes. And it can do the same thing with Jira, Salesforce, Zendesk, and a whole bunch of other business ERP SaaS type platforms. So if you want to try out the Salto DevOps platform yourself, you can sign up for a free trial at salto.io and also request a free demo. That, Tim, why do we love, hate NetSuite customization?
I think there's a lot of reasons why we do both. I think that hate's a strong word, and love might be a strong word too.
That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I was thinking about it, and just different experiences I've had over the years working with different clients, and I was thinking about um, one in particular that was just a huge surprise to me. They had been on NetSuite for years and years before they reached out to me. And they had no customizations. When I say that, they may have had a custom field or two, but they had made no
Sure.
customizations to their NetSuite instance. And I just couldn't believe it because they'd been on NetSuite for a while. It was a pretty straightforward business. So what they would have customized, I don't know. They had reached out to me to develop a custom portal for them. Um, but what was interesting about that, again, they'd been on for so long and somehow had managed to run what we would refer to as kind of a vanilla NetSuite instance.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the most enjoyable instances to work in, right? Because it was, I don't want to say greenfield, but it was just, I didn't have to worry about a lot of ththings that I've otherwise have to worry about.
Yeah.
Um, so so that's one of the things that when I started to think about this episode, like I thought about that account, that customer, and then just also that I think a lot of clients, I surprise a lot of my clients when I advise them in many cases not to customize things, or when I ask them a million times, "Are you sure you want to make this change? Are you really sure?" Um, because essentially I make my living doing customizations, NetSuite customizations in one form or another.
Right.
So I'll kick the conversation off that way. Like, what are your sort of initial comments about this whole thing?
I do both love and hate it. And yeah, maybe those are extreme words. But it's challenging, it's fun, it's but it's in a lot of ways it's like a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. There's a lot of benefits and drawbacks to customizing your NetSuite instance. I think the default behavior, I think like you mentioned, it was very surprising to see a vanilla NetSuite instance. The default behavior definitely seems to be adapt NetSuite to the business rather than adapting the business to NetSuite. Even though there can be a lot of value and lower cost, definitely, in adapting your business to the way NetSuite works rather than adapting NetSuite to the way your business has been working. Um, and I think despite the fact that behavior got me where I am, all the NetSuite consulting work and experience I was able to do. And, we wouldn't be here talking about this if there weren't NetSuite developers, if NetSuite didn't let you customize it. I think there's still a lot of value in being very disciplined and in understanding and really, I want to say here, searching for a verb, but being very selective about
Mhm.
what you customize and what you adapt your business to instead.
Yeah.
So
So,
I don't know.
but
How do you go about doing that? I guess. What are the factors you look at when you're advising your client? Like, are you sure you want to do this?
yeah, well, I think we get into the pros and cons of customization, like,
Sure.
those are really the factors. But let's talk about what we mean by customizations because,
Yeah.
it's a word we throw around in the NetSuite developer community a lot. But, what does that really mean? Is it just simply adding a custom field or a custom record type, or is it way beyond that? Like when you think of customizations, what do you group in there?
Technically, all of it, the smallest thing. But
Yeah.
really, I think we're talking about, I'm really thinking about sort of business processes when you
Mhm.
are changing the way, like the way that NetSuite, the logic of NetSuite or a particular flow, how things work. Um, that's really what I'm thinking about when you're taking, say, someone's, an employee at your company, you're taking their job and you're sort of automating it or optimizing it within NetSuite. That's mostly what I'm thinking of. Adding a column to the database here and there, not really super impactful. So it's not.
Yeah.
That's maybe not what we're talking about.
I would agree with you. And I thought that too, like really we're talking about anything that like is like that involves business logic and has potential to really impact the business. But
Mm-hmm.
then, even this, well, I guess what we would refer to as sort of the simple customizations like adding fields, adding custom record types. It's easy to kind of dismiss those, but like going back to our previous episode where we talked about naming things, you have the potential to really screw
Yeah.
that up too. And
Mm-hmm.
that also potentially causes issues with the other customizations, right? So if the naming of everything is crazy and you're the poor guy that's in
Yeah.
there writing scripts,
Trying to find stuff. Yeah.
yeah, it can be really frustrating. So, and there's also
Mm-hmm.
things like permissions, how like who has permission to access this record type. So it really does, I think, include all those things that as developers, we do kind of, I think, take for granted, fields and record types and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are
Yeah.
also the customizations that you don't really, I'll say this and you might disagree, I don't know, but that you don't really need a developer to make, like workflows and changes to forms, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. They do impact the business and they do need to be done right. And, they shouldn't take those lightly either. So it's anytime you're flipping a switch inside a NetSuite, in my opinion, you're customizing it. You have potential to break it,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anywhere there's potential for breakage or maintenance effort, yeah, I suppose that should all count. It's all important, does all matter.
Mhm.
Um, and especially over time, it will all contribute to the cognitive load of your system, the performance of your system, certainly. Um, so
Yeah. So before we started, you and I were chatting a little bit, and I
yeah.
said that I have, as far as the pros and cons of customizations go, I have more cons than I do pros, and I think by a wide margin.
Uh-oh.
Um, so what should we start with? You want to start with the pros of customization or cons?
Uh, it doesn't matter to me. Start with the most interesting one you've got, whether pro or con.
Well, I think the short list is for me is pros. Yeah, so I think one of the big pros of customization, or maybe this is more of a observation again of like my clients and people I've worked with,
Hmm.
is that I think it's NetSuite's ability to be customized. Like you could customize almost anything. And some things
Yeah.
are easy to customize and some aren't, but it's the ability to customize NetSuite that I think is why a lot of our clients choose NetSuite to begin with, right? I know
Hmm.
that the very first NetSuite client I had, that was really the main feature of NetSuite that was like, okay, yeah, that's the one for us. That's the ERP that we want because they were used to developing custom software and they had some processes and things that I knew they held onto very tightly and weren't going to let go of. And I know other ERP systems can be customized, but our
Mhm.
experience and or research had shown that NetSuite was just it just seemed like it was the one that was going to be the easiest to customize. Have you found that too? Like, are you ever involved in the evaluation of other ERPs or talk to clients and ask them like, did you choose NetSuite?
Not other ERPs. I have very little experience with other ERPs other than integrating them to NetSuite in some way.
Mhm.
But like, I've never logged into Salesforce before, um, or Zendesk or anything like that. So it's not ERPs usually, it's other systems, Jira or any of the Atlassian tools. Use those
Mhm.
a lot, integrated those a lot. Um, so I'm not involved in that level of like comparison assessment. Should you buy NetSuite? I think the thing I do notice in some of those other SaaS business platforms is a lot of them are customizable to a certain extent, especially adding custom fields, that
Mhm.
sort of thing, like sort of database type customizations you can make. Very few of them allow like scripting, right, or workflows, that type of customization. And the ones that do, it's usually like very external to the system, and it's a completely different um, workflow. Like customizing, the last time I tried to build Atlassian like Jira customizations, it was a huge pain in the ass to get that set up,
Mhm.
and to work on that, to test and all that stuff. It was this production, shall we
Yeah.
say. And I feel like NetSuite, maybe it's just because I've been doing it so long, but NetSuite is just much easier to just get in and get started. That's the learning curve notwithstanding. That's a huge problem,
Yeah.
um, or a huge hurdle, I should say. And so I think the breadth of customizations that you can make and the depth of them in NetSuite is amazing and terrifying.
Yeah.
It
I was
gives it gives us a lot of power,
mhm.
and it gives a lot of people within an organization, not just developers, not just administrators. It gives a lot of people a lot of power to sort of make it their own, and that comes at a price. It gives a lot of people the power, enough power to be dangerous. So we have
Yeah.
to be very careful about that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think with NetSuite, it makes it, I mean, it's all relative, but I think making customizations in NetSuite is easy, especially compared to the other systems that you described. And maybe it's too easy, right? In some cases. But I think like the biggest pro of customizing NetSuite is that you really can't, like the phrase you use, you can make it your own, right? And the way I kind of look at it is I have a lot of clients who, whether it's true or not, they think they have some sort of like, I call it their secret sauce, like this is the secret to our success. And without this one thing that we do, we wouldn't be successful. And I think NetSuite's ability to implement whatever that secret sauce is, that process or whatever it is, like again, that's not only the selling point for NetSuite, but it's what potentially is going to make the NetSuite implementation in the long run successful. Like if a lot of clients feel like if they can't do that thing, and maybe it's multiple things, that
Mm-hmm.
NetSuite's not going to work for them. So I think that's
Right.
the biggest pro, right? Is you really can make it your own. When I say make it your own, the business make it their own, implement like
Right.
how they
Right.
do business. So yeah.
Should you make it your own? Is sort of the central question, I guess, we're asking.
Well, I think that's where maybe that's where all my cons come in. They're really questions, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe you run through these, hey, are you sure about this? Like, did you consider this and that? I think, and I don't know, again, like I know you don't have a lot of experience in other ERPs in general, but you hear chatter all the time, and or I
Sure.
think it's not as common as it used to be, but I think just there's this general belief in IT that ERP customizations are just a bad idea. I'm not talking specifically about NetSuite, but just don't do it. like it's a
Hmm.
bad thing.
Yeah.
Um, in some cases with other systems, I think it's the developers of those systems themselves that are kind of like encouraging or discouraging clients rather from making customizations. Where they want you to come to them to make those changes, right? Like there's that. I don't think that's true in the NetSuite space, but I think people coming to NetSuite from other ERPs where maybe they've had bad experiences, it's in the back of their mind sometimes. So like, I'll give you an example. I had a client who had a general ledger. I think it was like an early version of like whatever Microsoft was calling it. Um, I can't remember what the name of it is because they have like a million different flavors.
Yeah.
They had
Yeah.
customized their system and then they got themselves stuck on whatever version they were customizing. Like the changes that they had made locked them in that version, and then they could not
Hmm.
easily upgrade as Microsoft. I don't even think it was really them. Um, as they would release new versions of the ERP, they couldn't, come along for the ride. It would have been a huge rewrite of all those customizations. Things would have broken. They've
Yeah.
tried. Um, and so which brings me to like one of the pros of NetSuite customization is, and this amazed me when I first started getting involved in NetSuite. I think it's hard. I'll probably regret this like tomorrow, something will go wrong, but it's hard to do a customization on a system that doesn't, uh, that locks you in on a NetSuite version or causes you grief when the version changes, when we get a release.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you, you kind of have to go out of your way to screw that up. What do you feel the same way about that? Have you seen any customizations where the client was then like, oh, like, when they did like a release preview, they realized something was, hopefully they tested and they realized that something was going to break hard. Have you seen that?
Yeah, but it's rare. It's really rare that there's breaking changes that come from a NetSuite update.
Mhm.
They do happen. I would say more than new release versions of NetSuite breaking something. It's the maintenance builds, every Thursday night or whatever. That Friday morning, weird stuff happens in in certain accounts I've been in the past. There was one um, team I worked on that repeatedly on like one Friday morning every month our MapReduce scripts would stop working because record.submit fields would stop working, or maybe it was save, one of those would stop working and throw the same error, and every time we had to open a NetSuite case and they would just say, okay, we fixed it, it works now. And we had to do it 3 times, 3 months in a row.
Hmm.
Still no idea what was happening there. So that's more the breaking changes I've seen with no recourse, no information on how to like prevent that in the future. So
Yeah.
it's been really rare that a new release has broken something. It's more that something gets added that we can take advantage of and refactor and maybe get rid of some stuff, things like that.
Mhm.
But it's pretty rare for a breaking change in my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised that that was the case too. You just generally don't have to think about it. So it's a con
Yeah.
of doing a
It's really
customization.
impressive.
Yeah. It's I think that's one of the ones where, yeah, if you were looking at a different ERP system, maybe that's more likely that things aren't going to break and break hard. Um, but with NetSuite, it's not an issue. So, it's great as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Um, so the other one of the things I got to thinking about is customizations that are made immediately or before go live, even. And I think, in the description of this episode, we talked a little bit about like when to make changes and stuff like that. What are
Hmm.
your feelings about, and I don't know like how early on you get involved in some with some clients or have in the past, but like, have you ever run into a situation where you had somebody that was either they just went live or they were about to go live and then they have this huge list of customizations that they want to make? Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah. I I worked for a consulting firm for many years, so yeah, I've had the go live rush
Mhm.
many times. December through all of December used to be the worst month of my year because everybody wants to go live on January 1st, even though none of the accounting team is available because they're closing out the year and all the customizations are for them, so they're not there to review. Yeah, I've definitely had that experience. I I think there's from that experience, I feel like there's just not enough. The bar for what is required to operate your business is too high. Like there's
Yeah.
way too many customizations that you feel like must be there before
Mhm.
you'll even start using NetSuite in production. And I think that bar is way too high for what qualifies. Way too low. Way too low for what qualifies. Too many things qualify. It's too low. It's too low. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
Yeah, I know what you
Uh,
mean. Yeah.
too many things, too many customizations are able to block go lives and
Mhm.
implementations, and even it's not even go lives. It's not even implementations. It's projects in general.
Yeah.
It takes so long to close out some projects. That's where a lot of like scope creeps comes from. Is we're too lenient on what can delay the release or the go live. There's just too many things. Too
Yeah.
many consultants, contractors are just order takers, I guess, and just say yes
Mhm.
to whatever without pushing back on the prioritization. And do you actually need this, or can this, like, what if this is day one instead of day zero? What if it's day seven? What if it's day 60? You know,
Yeah.
um, that level of prioritization is is lacking in a lot of the projects I've seen.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a red flag for me when whether I'm working with an existing client or a new client that comes to me for customizations right away like that. It's either part of implementation or they just went live because what I've found, or maybe it's just my perception in those cases, is that it's a client that's coming from another system usually, and they're trying to basically build whatever that system was inside of NetSuite. Maybe some
Yeah.
subsystem, like, well, here's how we do inventory or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it happens to be. And yeah, I mean that can cause a lot of issues, right? Like a phrase I guess I would use is sometimes you have to let NetSuite be NetSuite, right? Like this is how it works out of the box. And do you really need it to do something differently? Like it goes back to evaluating how important or you know do you really need whatever it is that you think you need? Maybe it's better to just go live, see how the purchasing system works, for example, and then decide,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we do it differently enough that we need some customization, or maybe the customizations are minor. Um, so
Yeah.
there's that. And then there's also the cost, right? Like usually, hopefully, clients implementing NetSuite have some budget for this, right? And it's the customizations, I think, sometimes that can really blow the budget, you know. So
For
I
sure.
think, yeah, I can't imagine any customizations that you'd make early on that wouldn't, I mean, maybe minor ones that don't cost a lot of money, but they're going to add up. So there's that.
Well,
Um,
and most of let's take a scripting customizations for example. Most of the cost of a software project is on the back end, the maintenance phase, not
mhm,
the initial implementation of it. um it's probably by now it's an old number, but when I was going through school and stuff, the number was always like the cost of implementing a software project is 30% of the lifetime of that project. So you're once you pay for that initial implementation, now you're still going to pay three times that in the maintenance phase over the next, X number of years or whatever it is.
mhm,
So just getting to the starting line is not the end of cost of customization. There's maintenance effort, there's performance cost, there's um, training cost. All of that starts to pile up the longer you have a customization that's live.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned before about how I think a lot of customers or NetSuite clients, they do think that they need a certain customization and maybe they move forward with it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
right. And maybe it's something significant that they feel like is lacking in NetSuite. So they build this custom system out, and then lo and behold, with the announcement of the next release, the features coming in the next release of NetSuite,
Yeah.
whatever it was they
Mm-hmm.
had you build, there's that thing, right? That now we can do it natively. Um,
Yeah.
there's the potential for that, which can be a problem. Or, like I say that, but like a lot of what I've seen is that if a customer is going to take the time to build something custom, hopefully it really is so custom to them that even the next thing that NetSuite releases that, we do whatever that process was, we now do it natively. It's still not quite up to par with how they would have done it. So, but I say that, and maybe it just required minor customization of NetSuite's native functionality. So there is that potential, right? And
Sure.
I used to see it a lot with like things like warehouse management, uh, the quote preparation, like things like that. So I guess I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that. Have you seen that too, or and what have your clients done? Do they scrap what you built, or does it just depend?
The sunken cost fallacy has long, deep claws. Uh, most people will stick with what they built because they paid to have it built, and they train their users
Mhm.
to use it. There's a lot of sunk cost that feels bad. It feels bad to get rid of it, to replace it. It feels bad, and that is often enough to keep you using something um, when maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's tough. It's tough to get someone off of that once they've built it. You know, NetSuite's the same. NetSuite itself is the same way. Like the claws are deep. As soon as you start using it, day one, it's the switching cost is extremely high,
Mhm.
and so yeah, switching to something native or something like that, trying to get someone over that sunken cost fallacy is difficult, and it kind of depends on what the transition effort would be too, right? If and what the gap is between the two. So you've got to be really open and honest and understand that stuff. Understand, okay, if we switch, what's it going to take to switch? Uh, and will there be any gaps? You know, what are we going to gain by switching? What are we going to lose by switching? You have to be really um, thorough in enumerating that stuff and doing cost analysis on all that stuff. If it's, if you're switching to from this does 100% of what we want down to 80%, that might be fine if that 20% is minor, sacrificable, I suppose, or it might be a deal breaker. So you've
Yeah.
got to you can't just say because something native came out, let's switch. That's not going to work. It's
Right.
going to feel really bad, and it's going to take a lot of convincing to do that. So you've got to do that analysis, that gap analysis, cost analysis, opportunity cost analysis. What else could you do with the time instead of
Mhm.
switching, or instead of transitioning to that new thing? So the switching cost is high no matter what. And the bigger or the more critical this, whatever the customization is to the path, the the deeper those clause are, the higher that switching cost is.
Mhm. Yeah. It's as if you've created your own lock-in on whatever that feature
Yeah.
is. And,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's tough. And what
And you
I've
have.
seen some customers do is they'll use their custom function, whatever, up to a certain point, and then if they switch to the new native version of it, there's this weird, like, like the line in the sand where, like, well, this report worked great, just as long as you only run it prior to 2023. after that, you know what I mean?
The
And then
cutover.
yeah, it's like, oh, wow, and that's just, kind of odd. So, okay. So I think, the biggest disadvantage, however, of customization is that, we're assuming that the customizations that we're talking about are all going correctly. They've been done right. That's not always the case. And I think,
How dare you?
yeah, imagine that. A customization that isn't done correctly, however you want to define that, can
Mhm.
cause like major problems, right? Reliability,
Yeah,
the problems with the data itself, performance issues. And it's, again, it's something to think about before you pull the trigger on a customization. It's like, is this like, what are the risks? Because it may be one of those things where it seems like the customization is working perfectly. And then, you get 3 months down the road and realize that some process, maybe it's not running when it should, or it's not doing something correctly. Maybe somebody flipped on a new feature or enabled something in NetSuite. Now the customization is broken, right? There's that.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, just the more customizations you make, the more likely I think you are to run into those kinds of things. So,
absolutely. The bigger footprint your customizations have, the more likely you are to run into some problem or issue.
mhm.
And they're all built by humans, so none of them are perfect. Um, you know, that process you do once every 3 months, you're gonna forget to test that during the implementation.
Yeah.
Those rare things that you do once a year, once every 6 months, whatever it is. Uh, Everyone forgets about those during the planning of some customization, and then 6 months later it breaks because you forgot to handle that specific case. Um, yeah, so you've got to be disciplined, I suppose, about that footprint.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think it was a couple of episodes back, we were talking about one of the common customizations that we see. I think you and I agreed on this, and I think it was Sonny who was on as a guest. We were talking about, I think it was him. It, Clients seem to have a real hard time not customizing things surrounding sales orders, especially sales
Yeah,
order entry.
every time. Yeah,
So
every
like
account.
that's one of those things where when I'm getting involved in a new instance, it's one of the first things I do is I go and look at what the sales order form looks like, just how slow is it. But yeah, it's like, so I think that's interesting. I think that there are certain common customization points, and that's one that I see.
That is one
Um,
of them.
yeah,
I'm really surprised. This is tying maybe a little bit back to what we were just talking about before, but I'm really surprised at how flippant a lot of companies can be about customizing NetSuite. Like,
yeah,
this is your GL, right? These are your books. So if something goes wrong, it goes wrong really badly. So,
mhm,
but there's often not a lot of rigor in coming up with customization, like planning, prioritizing, risk analysis, that sort of thing. I don't see, some companies are great at it, and some are just, yeah, just throw a workflow in.
right.
Whoever
Yeah.
wants to throw a workflow in there, throw a script in there, sure. Um,
Yeah, I think that
and
what they're
I
not
don't know that
thinking
I
of,
have a point, more just an observation of how surprisingly little rigor there is sometimes in
right.
customizing your GL.
Well, I don't think it's so much about customizing like the GL as it is like not thinking about, we'll call it the GL impact, but it's like the everything that's sort of upstream from the GL, it's like transactions and inventory and pricing and stuff like that. Like it all flows down and eventually,
Right.
well,
It is all
in
connected.
most cases, yeah. So if your sales order entry screwed up and the pricing's whacked and everything downstream from that is probably also going to be impacted. I don't know how it couldn't. So I think that's why. Like it's just, well, yeah, if it goes wrong, we'll fix it. Well, okay. Um, Hopefully the
That's
accountant that you're
true.
working with will say something like, hey, maybe you should think about this first. So
Yeah.
yeah. So when are there other areas of NetSuite that you see that are customized often, like, or just like I said, I feel like a lot of clients just can't leave sales orders alone, but are there other?
Customers,
Hmm,
customers. It's
okay,
if it's not sales orders, it's customers.
yeah. You see like 1,000 custom entity fields on that, like,
Fields and
mhm,
workflows that mostly do like one workflow for sourcing every different field,
yeah.
or like each custom field has its own workflow to source the right data into it. Um, yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, Invoicing, definitely, Todd in the chat over here. Um, Consolidated invoices is like
Mm, yeah,
everyone wants to do that. Um, it's
yeah.
surprising you can't do it out of the box, I guess. But
I think you can now, right?
yeah.
That's what an invoice group is, which is, by
Mm-hmm.
the way, one of those kinds of things where when that got rolled out, I had clients that were already trying to do their own version of that. And,
And
it
there
was,
are 17 suite apps that do it too.
hmm,
And yeah.
right. Yep. I see other areas that surprise me, because you would think they would be pretty solid. And pricing is one, like how they apply pricing based on like certain conditions, like the customer and so on. Commissions is huge. I've seen so many different implementations of how people implement commissions that I feel like I could write a book on it. And trust me, I'm never going to do that. um, have you run into
Yeah.
that one with commissions?
Yeah. It's not something I thought about because it was actually probably one of my earliest projects, maybe when I was 6 months into NetSuite. I spent 2 years building. That felt like all I did for a couple of years was
Mhm.
commissions. Um, so yes, I've seen that one
Yeah,
too.
it's crazy. Um, Item configurations is another, just complexity of the items and how they're modeled in NetSuite. Um,
Yeah. Product
mm,
configurators, another popular product
yeah,
customization.
yeah. I'm grateful for that one because I get that one off. But yeah, there's that. And then just the other thing I see, and it's not really a customization so much, it's just how customers choose to deal with selling a large number of SKUs, right? And large is
Yeah.
relative, put air quotes around
Mm-hmm.
it, but that's another one. I see customers who, if they're selling 500,000 different SKUs, the first thing they want to do is import them all into NetSuite. And maybe that makes sense. Most of the time, I think it doesn't, but that's probably a customization that I would probably say, yeah, if you don't make that one, you might regret it later.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. I wanted to bring those up because I think I'm curious, and maybe everyone that's on the call, like I'm curious as to whether you've seen some of those customizations or maybe other ones that you're seeing often that we haven't mentioned. But I think it goes to show, going back to the beginning where we said you can pretty much customize like NetSuite however you want. I have some clients who will pick one of those things that we talked about and just customize it like mad. Then I have some clients who will customize all of those things and go crazy, right? It's like it becomes this thing. I will just customize NetSuite. So, um,
Yeah, it gets to be too easy.
yeah,
It gets to be too easy to customize it. So you don't think about it as much as you should. Maybe don't plan ahead or again do that risk analysis as much as you maybe should.
and I think they stack up, right? So even simple
Absolutely.
customizations, like over time, you get so many of them, and they're not all written by the same person usually or the same consulting firm.
Or even the same company. Yeah.
Yeah, so that can cause problems, and that goes back to like the considerations, like I think you asked me at the top, like what should people think about, or how do you weigh the decision of whether to customize something or not. And I think that there's just a lot of common sense things that you can do to like maybe make the decision if you have chosen to go and customize something, and like maybe a better chance of it being successful. um I think one is like who's in charge of making those kinds of decisions? Is there someone? Is there like a NetSuite administrator or an ERP administrator or somebody in the organization that's got, authority to say, yes, we'll do that one or no, we won't. Who's going to scope it out? Who's going to review it? Like, is there some formal process in place?
Hmm.
Those kinds of things. And we talked the last episode again about naming, like standards and stuff. Going back to that point of like having so many different companies make customizations in the system, that's where the potential for things to go crazy, kicks in. Because if one firm's using a different naming method, this one's using something else,
Yeah.
there's approval, review, deployment, multiple customizations going on at the same time in the same instance or in different, sandbox accounts. I mean, it can get really complicated very quickly. So like what appears to be easy, these customizations, maybe it's not as easy as it looks. So
It almost never is.
yeah.
Um, Almost never. There's always more. No matter what customization you're building, you are only building the tip of the iceberg, and you
Mhm.
will only discover more problems the longer it's active.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think the other part of that too is we talked about how the customizations sort of stack, they add up over time. And I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in a customization where it seems straightforward at first, and then you realize, oh, there's these other customizations that were made that you didn't know about that weren't apparent. And then you realize that the
yeah,
foundation you were building your customization on is like, oh, wait a minute, it's not what I thought. Um,
it has shifted. Yeah,
yeah, that's where like one of the other things I was going to mention is just you've got to document these things, right? And it's too easy not to. You hire a firm that's maybe working by the hour and they're just trying to get the customization done. Maybe it's a workflow or a suitelet or whatever, a client script, and they do their
hmm,
work and they're gone.
yeah,
And you know, but that's where having somebody in the organization who hopefully is documenting all that stuff, but also maybe has awareness of it and can say, hey, don't forget,
yeah,
if you're going to customize that, we need to look at what was done before. So
yeah. You had mentioned like who's responsible for making the decisions. There's always someone who can say yes. There's always someone at the business who can greenlight a project and
mhm,
write the check. But there's not always someone who has the awareness
yeah.
of the systems, of NetSuite, of the systems that talk to NetSuite, and those sort of system level workflows, not NetSuite workflows, but business processes. Um, Someone having that level of awareness is rare, much more rare. Unfortunately, that is, I think, a critical role in pretty much any business that runs on NetSuite or any similar application that lets you customize it, is having someone who has sort of, I don't quite want to say oversight, but oversight and awareness of all of the customizations that you're building. Um, Hopefully, yeah, they're documenting it. And if a customer, this has never happened, but if a client came to me with like style guide that they had of like, here's how you build a customization in our system, here's the convention for the IDs, here's how we name stuff. Never happened, but if it did, I would never leave that client. I would work with them forever.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
that's amazing. It's a good idea. I do it. I've done it on every team I've worked on as a professional software engineer. Has had a style guide. This is how we write code. This is how we name things. This is how we format our code, because it eliminates a big chunk of the decision space that you have to make. And by reducing that decision space, reducing the cognitive load, your system gets that much easier to understand, to bring someone into, to say, customize it further. You bring in a contractor, a consultant, whatever, bring in a new team member, new hire. All of that documentation is, uh, it's, it's hard to, or like you said, it's easy to not do, but it's invaluable when you do it,
Mhm.
if you actually put it to use. too many
Yeah.
teams sort of write the document to check the box, and then it goes into a Google Drive folder and nobody ever sees it again.
Right.
So having that, thinking about putting someone in place, maybe it's a dedicated role, maybe it's not, but someone in place to have oversight sort of over your NetSuite instance that is aware of all the customizations and is responsible for sort of coordinating those, and maybe being a little bit of a gatekeeper, deciding who can make customizations. That's like permission stuff's pretty common, especially larger companies, but more, what types of customizations do we make? What's the decision process? How do we decide what's customizable, what's worthy of customization, what's not, what's off limits, that sort of thing, setting the boundaries around customization.
Yeah.
It's rare that I see someone in that role. I have seen it a few times, but not enough.
What was the title of the person that you've seen that had that oversight?
Sometimes it's like NetSuite administrator, and sometimes it's more like financial business systems lead or something like that, coordinator.
Yeah.
I've seen it a few times with varying titles. Effectively, they're a NetSuite administrator, right? But it goes beyond that. I think they need to be aware of all the systems, the business processes that are involved.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up something from the last episode that you had mentioned. We were talking about naming things, and we were talking about using terminology of like the business's domain. You had mentioned, and I can't remember exactly what the example was, but it was a client of yours where I think they were doing fundraising or something along those lines. And instead of referring to, I think I got this right, instead of referring to customers, they referred to them as, was it constituents or donors, or
Yep.
did I have that
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Constituents. Yeah.
okay. So, and I think they made that change, right? Inside of NetSuite,
Mm-hmm.
anything that you and I
Yep.
would normally see as customer was constituent.
Correct.
I, ha- I don't know how I feel about that. On one hand, I'm like, okay, yes, it makes total sense. On the other hand, as a developer coming into it, I understand that you have to, understand the lingo and the jargon, the terminology that people are using, but was that a challenge for you working on that instance? Like where you would normally refer to customer in code? Like what was the impact of a change like that?
Actually, no, that client was one that actually did have someone, a NetSuite administrator, who had been there the whole time, had been there for like almost 10 years, and had been there with the implementation and had been the administrator the whole time, and had documentation about their environment. And so like we had a sort of kickoff introductory type period, and she just ran me through like, here's a big overview of our business and why we do these things. And
Mm,
yeah, and that, so like day one I was aware that customers are called constituents, and it was literally never a problem for the
awesome.
5 years I worked with them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like my point was, like I wonder how if some customizations can cause grief in other unexpected ways, for other developers coming in later. But it sounds like in your case, it was done well, like you had a dream client there, almost anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Having
interesting.
an administrator, someone with oversight who is, one, knowledgeable, of course, but also is proactive in sort of documenting and sharing that knowledge is, uh, I couldn't put a price on that employee. I would pay
Mhm.
that employee as much as they wanted.
Yeah.
you know, um, that's invaluable. That level of, because I see someone commented central knowledge repository. Knowledge is great. You need it. That's sort of the baseline. That's the bare minimum. Yes, document stuff and store it in an organized manner. That's the minimum that I'm talking about here. You also need processes in place. You need people to communicate that knowledge. You need processes to bring people into that knowledge, make them aware of that knowledge. You need workflows to be updating that knowledge. If your central knowledge repository is just a dumping ground of static documents, it's you wasted your time making the documentation.
Yeah.
You can't just say, here's the pile of documents we have, go read them. That's not useful or helpful. You need context for all of that knowledge, and you need it to surface in the places you need, or in the places it's relevant. That's hard to do. I'm being very vague, I guess, but a simple thing like contextual help in NetSuite. I'm looking at the sales order page and I click the help button. It pulls up enter a sales order, the help page for enter a sales order, stuff like that. If your knowledge repository is just, if you have a Confluence account that's over there and you tell someone to go log in and look at this page, it's not super helpful. There's got to be processes around your knowledge as well. Yeah. So when you bring in a consultant, you walk them through these are the things they need to know. I'm going to share all these documents with them. I'm going to walk through it with them. When you bring on a new hire, a new developer, here is our onboarding process. Here are all the things that a new developer at this company needs to know to be successful here. And we're going to spend 30 days going through this program, walking through all this material. Very few teams get to that level of sophistication, but it's impressive, one, and successful too. Like being able to share all that knowledge you've accumulated and recorded is the only way that knowledge is valuable.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that like all that is important regardless of the size and complexity of the company and their NetSuite instance. I've seen smaller companies who, again, like go crazy on the customizations, no documentation, no, good resource to go to ask about things, and it just gets away from them, right? That can happen just as easily with a smaller client as it can with a larger one. So I don't know how to communicate that to the right people to say, like, if you're going to start customizing NetSuite, be careful and do it right. I also wanted to mention too that when things do start to kind of go off the rails, you see these kinds of posts on some of the forums, like all of a sudden, like we'll pick on the sales order entry again, customers are complaining, and when the sales order form comes up, it takes 5 minutes. They go and get coffee and come back, and then they start to see, the form rendering finally. I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, maybe not. And so, there are things you can do to kind of troubleshoot that. There's the APM where you can kind of, I think you still have to install that, right? I think it's a bundle. To kind of look at things, try to figure out what's causing that grief. What type of script is it? Is it a script at all?
Yeah.
So I think that's important to note. You're not completely dead in the water if your customizations start to backfire on you.
Yeah.
Do you have other ideas on that too? Like ways that people can help themselves to troubleshoot some of these things, or is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, if I suppose it depends on the problem, right? It depends on how it's backfiring. If it's performance related, like if you can take your lunch break while you're waiting for your sales order page to load, APM, the application performance management suite app, is the way to go for that. That will show you, sort of break down the performance by customization. What is taking so long when I view a sales order, for instance. So that's the way to go for performance related stuff. For others, I need an example, I guess, to see how is it going sideways.
Yeah. And if you don't have the talent on staff, you probably are going to need to bring somebody in to kind of try to figure out what's going on, or reach out to NetSuite if you've got, I guess, different levels of support there. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is kind of related to the kind of work that I do, but I think a lot of customizations, the assumption is made that the customization needs to be made inside of NetSuite, and a lot of the work that I'm doing these days, I'm building external apps and things that integrate with NetSuite, and you can refer to those. I think people often do as like bolt-ons and things like that. So
Mhm.
there may be other ways to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve that maybe isn't quite as an invasive customization as like some other ones might be. And it's worth, I think it's just worth pointing that out, that sometimes there's other ways of getting things done, whatever it is. So, and I
Yeah.
see a lot of clients who switch to NetSuite, and there's some process that ran in the old system that they think they're just going to turn it off on day one, you know, and NetSuite will pick it up. And sometimes that happens, but sometimes those things stick around, right? And then it's just a matter of
Mhm.
doing an integration. I'm oversimplifying it, but again, like there's one way potentially to achieve the goal without having to go in and rewrite that thing inside of NetSuite. Maybe you do it in over time. Maybe it never happens. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah, it can be really hard once someone has decided they want to customize or need a customization. Maybe a lot of the ways I've been phrasing this sounds like they're always wrong when they need customization. That's not true or what I'm saying, but
yeah.
uh, once someone has decided they want to customize it, it's like they go straight to we're going to build something custom. And maybe there's maybe there's a native feature that does it that gets you 60% of the way there. Maybe there's a suite app that gets you 80% of the way there. Maybe there's so there's other options than building it yourself. You can also look for alternative options that someone else has built. It's okay if someone else built it.
Mhm.
um, and sometimes, the 80-20 rule, right? If you get 80% of the way there, that's probably good enough. And then you can look at that last 20%, do a little gap analysis and figure out, do we actually need that? Can we adapt our business to not need that anymore? Or do we need to go a little bit extra and customize and really fill in that extra last 20%?
Yeah.
Um, Shobaya, I hope I got that right in the chat, has a good comment here I wanted to touch on. They've seen a lot of unwanted fields on the forms, which the business doesn't use anymore, and NetSuite recommends removing them from the form if they're not used. I think that once you build something, rarely do people have a sort of cyclical, consistent review process that says, "Do we still need this? Are we still using this customization? Can we get rid of this?" There's rarely a "can we get rid of this" assessment, which is something you should be doing all the time. Not all the time, but regularly, deciding like customizations will have a lifespan. No customization will last you forever. Your business is going to change. The context in which your business runs will change. The context of the employees at your business will change. And they'll do things differently. And so you need to continually be sort of trimming the fat, calling the stuff you don't use anymore. And I see a lot of reluctance to do that, to get rid of stuff, because of that sunken cost fallacy again. And also, specifically this example, forms on fields, we're so quick to like write a workflow, write a script, but we almost never thin out the forms and make really lean focused forms on like, this person does this on the sales order every day and they only need these fields on it. I rarely see the shortest list of customizations is always the custom forms, which is crazy to me. That's the easiest way to optimize somebody's workflow, is to just cut out all the fields that they don't use and just get them off the screen so they're not cluttering things up. It's not taking time to load that data, to display that data. So that's a super valuable customization, I guess I'm mentioning. Do form customization and do it liberally.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and then that also helps the users, right? Like I still remember the very first time I saw a salesperson see in the NetSuite. At the time, it was the default sales order entry screen, and you could just see the disappointment in their face and the confusion, and they're like, "Am I going to have to fill all that stuff out?" Like, no, you
Yeah.
don't. You see that little asterisk, but still, it's just. I think it's not a good first impression, So, and it's easy to do. Just so, yeah.
Especially if you just went live, you did a year, you've been customizing NetSuite for a year, and then this is the first time your sales rep is seeing that form.
Yeah.
They're going to be completely overwhelmed.
Right. Again, like it's a terrible first impression, and yeah. So you can always add them back in or whatever. So, all right. Are there other
Yeah.
questions in the chat?
No questions. I saw comment from David that said sales order form quantity of deployed scripts and customizations is a great litmus test for how much an account is customized. I definitely agree. Yeah, I think we've maybe been like, what number is too big? Question from Anne. That's a great question that feels difficult to answer.
Mm-hmm.
How many customizations is too many? It depends. Classic consultant answer,
Yeah,
right?
there you go.
It depends a lot on what resources you have available for maintaining those customizations. Like I said, 30% ish of the cost of any customization, or only 30% is in the implementation. 70% of the time and the cost and all of that stuff is after you implement a customization. So you're not going to turn something on and then it just runs forever smoothly. That never happens. So you have to expect there is maintenance with anything you customize. There's overhead, there's documentation, there's training, there's fixes as NetSuite changes or as the business changes around it. So if you don't have, you might have the resources to build that initial 30%, but if you don't then want to commit to the extra 70% of cost after that, probably don't want to build it. So there's not a specific number. Every company's different. It has a wildly different context that they're operating in. They have different resources available. So I can't give you one number, but every customization deserves prioritization and planning. And only the business in its current context can make that decision, I suppose.
Yeah. There was a comment from Garrett about, or a question really, where do you recommend documentation be stored?
Do you want to take that one? I took the last one.
Well, he asked, it's the NetSuite file cabinet a good choice for that? I don't know. A lot of my clients are small, and so they don't already have something like, some central place like you mentioned. I have other clients though that use things like Notion to document things,
Cross to
so
Notion, my favorite software tool.
yeah, and that's nice because you can, if it's done right, if it's implemented right at an organizational level, then hopefully it really does become like the single source of truth for all the customizations. I think having them all in one place is critical. I guess I'll take like the easy way out on this and say, I don't know that it matters so much where they are, as long as the right people can get to them when they need them, and it's a single place, like it's
Yes.
consistent. The worst thing is like, oh, that's right, we stored that documentation over with the script in the file cabinet next. Yeah, I see you grimacing there. Like,
Yeah.
it's like we've seen it all, I think. It's like documentation is so important, and yet at the same time, if we can't get to it, we don't know it exists, or it's not being updated, then yeah,
Yeah.
not good.
So where should you store it? It doesn't actually matter where, like what tool. There's not one tool, not one place. So you can use OneDrive, you can use Google Drive, you can use a network file share, whatever. You can use Confluence or Notion. It doesn't matter so much what tool you use as like you said, do the right people have access to that knowledge when they need it? Yeah, knowledge is not like a pile or a stack that you can just sort of go to and pull from. It's a web, and it's a contextual web. The web moves based on what you're doing, where you are, etc. So, your perspective on it shifts and the information you need changes. So wherever you store your knowledge, it needs to be in a place that is searchable, linkable, essentially. Your document needs to be linked, and then those links need to be in the places where that document is relevant. So if we're talking about code, I want documentation to be as close to the code as possible. Very often that means comments, but comments aren't a great format for all knowledge you might need about a piece of software. So links, you can just as easily write URLs in comments, and most IDEs will make them clickable. So, putting links to diagrams or whatever in the code itself, making the knowledge surfaceable where it's actionable, or surfacing the knowledge where it's actionable is the important part. Having, I think I mentioned on the last episode, like documentation is a habit. It's not a task. It's not a task you finish once and you're done. It's a habit. Good documentation is cultivated and updated over time. So you need processes in place to surface the knowledge where it's relevant, to inoculate people to the knowledge, to the repository, what it is, where it is, how it's organized, how to use it, how to update it themselves, when to update it. And yeah, you need processes in place to get people into that knowledge web. You need a knowledge management system, not just a knowledge management repository.
Yeah. You were mentioning earlier about the account that you had where they did change customer table to constituent, I think it was. And
yeah,
it sounded like the person that did that was a NetSuite admin, and that they
yes,
were very detail oriented. And I think it's, if you have that person and they're in charge of the documentation, hopefully that, like, you've got a fighting chance at that point. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So
Not everyone has the mindset or the habit, the discipline to do that. Support and habits in place to maintain that documentation.
yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yep. And it's a huge red flag when you do need documentation, or you've taken on an account, they're asking you to do a customization, your customization is dependent on something else that's already been done, and you ask, do you have any documentation on that? And they're like, no, but let me reach out to that developer. Hopefully they're still around and still with whatever
Yeah.
firm they were with. And
Hopefully they remember. Probably
yeah,
not,
right,
because they've built 77 customizations since then.
right. So, and I think as, developers, it's our job to, even if the customer doesn't ask for documentation, to provide it anyway. And certainly to write it, even if they don't want it, write it and hold on to it, so that when you are the person that's being reached out to say, hey, do you have any documentation on whatever it was? Yeah, let me send it over to you. It's not like, let me go back and try to recreate what I did and summarize it. So
Mm-hmm. The easiest time to train your documentation, to update your documentation, it's in the moment that you're changing whatever, building or changing the thing you're doing. It's way harder to come back later and do the documentation. So I think I heard someone recently on a podcast saying you should train your systems before you train your people. So someone asks you a question, you should document that question and answer, and then point the person to the document, or update the process with the whatever process they were following that they got stuck on. Add the sort of solution or update that process doc before you even answer the question, or come up with that together with the person who's stuck. Just updating it in the moment, because if you try to do it a week later, you won't. You'll forget.
yeah, something more
Train
important will
your
come up.
systems before you train your people.
Yeah. It's interesting how many of our episodes have this topic come up, just documentation in general. It's
Yeah,
just so important.
communication. is pretty important. Who would have thought?
Well, and we've said this before several times. It's not only communicating with others, other developers, administrators, whatever, but your future self, right? There's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your future self will thank you if you you could get it documenting your code and everything. So
There's a quote from a software developer. I can't and I'm not sure the name off the top, so I can't cite it properly. But the quote is something like, "Your code and especially your documentation is a love letter to the next person who has to work on that code." And it's the same for your documentation.
yeah, there's a more negative version of that where I think it's like assume that the next person is
Yeah,
gonna inherit your code as like a serial killer and he knows your home address. Something like that.
violent a violent psychopath who knows where you live
Yeah, there you go. So yeah,
is that quote. Yeah,
too funny.
I
All right.
preferred like the more positive one,
Yeah,
just like I
the love
prefer,
letter.
you know, what if they win the lottery versus what if they get hit by a bus.
hmm Yeah. All right. Is there anything else? Anything we haven't covered?
Um, yeah, I think we talked a lot about cons there. You mentioned your list is pretty long there, and I know we're running long. We'll wrap it up here shortly. But I think I do want to end on like a maybe something of a positive note. Like I and why I do this, or like the pro of building on NetSuite. I think building on a third party platform like NetSuite gives me the ability to like laser focus in on building business applications that serve my clients' needs. And that's what I like to do. I don't have to write login pages. I don't have to write token management software. I don't have to find services that do that stuff for me because all of that infrastructure is done for me. Uh, and I don't want to write that stuff. I don't like to write code that is close to the metal. I like to write code that is close to the people. And I especially like to write code that helps to automate or optimize a person's like day-to-day tasks and life. Because I think that's the most impactful software I can write. If you do like to write code that's close to the metal, I love you. We need you, but I don't want to be doing it. I'm not good at that stuff. Um, and so writing on NetSuite is is fantastic because it lets me focus in on that high level of software, um, helping automate people's tasks and let them freeing them up to hopefully do more important, impactful things with their time. The trade-off of that is that NetSuite puts a bunch of constraints on me. Right, I have to write in JavaScript, which I love, but many people don't. Um, there are constraints and guardrails and parameters that I have to follow. But generally, I think that's okay. I think that's good to have those guardrails and constraints in place. And that's not unique to NetSuite. Salesforce, any platform you go to has the same types of constraints. But I think that's a good thing to have those parameters, because if I just give you a blank page and say, write me a story, that's really hard to do. You will probably not like me very much. But if I give you a blank page and say, write me a story about a puppy with a blue collar who's wandering through a park, now you have constraints. I have put constraints on your creativity. I have restricted you, but you have a way clearer idea of what you can do and some context around what you're doing. So having those guardrails and constraints, I view as a good thing. And I love that I get to focus on just writing the software that I view as the most impactful that I can write again.
Yep, it's a good way to end it, I think. And yeah, hopefully my list of cons didn't make it, I didn't want to come off as being too negative about
But you're still
customizations in
doing it,
general.
so it must not bother you that much.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've written custom software. That's like my whole career is around that. And I've said this before when I first started to get involved in NetSuite, I wasn't sure that I was gonna like doing this kind of work because I was the guy who was building it from the ground up, doing the database design first and building all that out, and then the API, and literally from the ground up.
Mhm.
And I think to your point, what I quickly realized is that I don't need to do all that stuff now. Like I always had more fun at the top of all that. Like this is the business problem we're trying to solve. Yeah, I don't need to develop an entire system. And what better system to build on than NetSuite? So there's a positive way of ending the episode.
Great. I think that should take us out. So that will bring this episode of SuiteScript Stories to a close. Thanks everyone who joined us live for participating in the chat, asking questions. This was recorded and it will be available on the Salto YouTube channel and in the SuiteScript Stories podcast feed, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us about the show, you can email me, eric@stoic.software, and you can check out Tim's website, timdietrich.me. Links will be in the show notes or the description. And we hope you join us next time as we continue to explore and highlight interesting stories from the SuiteScript world. See you then.
Thanks, guys.